Two companies, one contract, and the most dangerous job in the history of private enterprise. Landing human beings on another world. Not building an app, not disrupting a market. Landing human beings on the moon. For most of the last decade, that contract felt like a foregone conclusion. One company was moving fast, breaking things, launching hardware while its competitors were still finishing PowerPoints. The outcome seemed almost inevitable. Almost. But something happened in 2026 that nobody outside of aerospace circles saw coming. The gap closed. The race that looked like a coronation became a genuine competition. And suddenly, the question of who carries astronauts to the lunar surface, a question with consequences stretching far beyond any single mission, became genuinely uncomfortably open. This is the story of that race. What's actually at stake, what both sides have to prove, and why the next 18 months may be the most consequential period in human spaceflight since Apollo 11 left the launch pad in the summer of 1969. To understand the pressure bearing down on both of these companies right now, you first have to understand what NASA actually needs from them, because it isn't just a spacecraft, it's something far more demanding than that. NASA's Orion capsule, the vehicle that carries astronauts from Earth, cannot land on the moon. It never could. It was designed to travel to lunar orbit, rendezvous with another vehicle, and transfer its crew across. That other vehicle, the one that descends through the void and touches down on the surface and then lifts back off again, that's the piece NASA doesn't build. That's the piece it handed to the private sector. That's the piece that SpaceX and Blue Origin are now racing to perfect. And the reason both companies are under existential pressure right now isn't just the contract value, though it is enormous. It's what losing would mean. For SpaceX, losing the crewed lander role would be the first major signal that the company's ambitions had outpaced its execution. For Blue Origin, losing would confirm every criticism that has followed the company for 15 years, that it is well-funded, technically serious, and perpetually not quite ready. Neither outcome is acceptable to either organization, which is why 2026 looks the way it does. Let's start with SpaceX, because in many ways, Starship is the most astonishing engineering object in the world right now. The numbers are almost comically large, 121 meters tall, nearly 17 million pounds of thrust at liftoff, 33 engines on the first stage alone, each one more powerful than anything SpaceX flew before they redesigned their entire propulsion architecture to build this thing. When Starship launches, it doesn't just shake the ground, it reshapes the conversation about what rockets can be. And yet, Starship has a problem that its sheer size cannot solve. The version of Starship that needs to land on the moon is not the version currently flying. The lunar variant requires modifications, structural changes, and one capability that represents perhaps the most difficult engineering challenge in the entire Artemis program. It has to refuel in orbit. Think about what that actually means. Cryogenic propellant, liquid oxygen, and liquid methane kept at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero, pumped through a docking connection between two spacecraft while both of them move at nearly 8 kilometers per second through the vacuum of space with no atmosphere to dampen any vibration, no gravity to help settle the fluid, and no margin for error, because the fuel that gets transferred is the fuel that carries astronauts back from the moon. This is not a mature technology. It is not a solved problem. It is a fundamental unknown that SpaceX must demonstrate in actual orbit before any human being is assigned to a mission that depends on it. SpaceX knows this. They have been developing the technology. The progress is real, but progress and readiness are different things, and the 2026 demonstration flight will be the moment the industry finds out which one SpaceX actually has. Blue Origin's story runs through a different kind of pressure. For years, the company built under a philosophy its founder described as gradual, methodical, careful, incremental. New Shepard flew tourists to the edge of space on a vehicle that returned its capsule gently to the desert floor, which was impressive and commercially successful, and completely insufficient preparation for building an orbital rocket capable of delivering a lunar lander to cislunar space. New Glenn changed that. Blue Origin's orbital rocket, named for astronaut John Glenn, flew in early 2025. It worked. Not perfectly, not without lessons, but well enough to make clear that the company had crossed a threshold that its critics had long questioned whether it would ever reach. The vehicle that can actually get Blue Moon to where it needs to go exists, and it flies. Blue Moon itself is a different kind of design than Starship, where SpaceX's approach is scale. Build something enormous. Make the economics work through reusability and size. Blue Origin's lander is purpose-built for the specific problem of descending to the lunar surface and returning safely. It is not trying to be a general-purpose spacecraft. It is trying to be the best lunar lander that has ever been designed, with no other ambition distracting from that singular goal. Blue Origin also faces the refueling problem. Their architecture requires propellant depots in cislunar space, which means they share with SpaceX the foundational challenge of making orbital fuel transfer work, and the differences in the staging. Blue Origin's system is designed around a depot model rather than ship-to-ship transfer, which some engineers argue is more stable and which others argue introduces a different set of risks that are no less serious. The 2026 test will begin to settle that debate. Here's what makes the next 18 months so genuinely important to watch. NASA did something in 2026 that broke from decades of institutional habit. They admitted clearly and without much softening language that attempting a direct crewed lunar landing without validating the systems first was not a risk profile they were willing to accept, so they changed the mission. Artemis 3, originally conceived as the dramatic return of American astronauts to the lunar surface, was restructured. The mission now focuses on Earth orbit, a systematic, disciplined, step-by-step verification of every critical system before anyone gets within 250,000 miles of the moon, docking procedures practiced until they are reflexive, life support hardware run through conditions that approximate what the crew will actually face, spacesuits worn, tested, and evaluated by actual astronauts in actual space, not in simulations, not in vacuum chambers, but in the environment they were built for. After that orbital validation, an uncrewed lunar landing, one of these two vehicles descending alone autonomously to the lunar surface and coming back, the final evidence that the hardware is ready before a crew is assigned to depend on it. This is methodical in a way that NASA, historically, has struggled to be when political pressure was pushing in the other direction. The fact that they made this call anyway, despite the headlines it generated, despite the critics who saw schedule revision as admission of failure, is arguably the most encouraging institutional signal the agency has sent in 20 years. And underneath all of it, underneath the engineering competitions, the timeline revisions, the orbital refueling experiments, there is a geopolitical reality that frames everything. China's space program is not a distant concern. It is an active, funded, technically sophisticated competitor that has already landed on the lunar far side, already returned samples from the moon, and already declared a concrete target for a permanent human presence on the lunar surface. They are not waiting for the outcome of the SpaceX Blue Origin competition. They are not watching to see how Artemis resolves. They are building. The lunar South Pole, the target both NASA and China are aiming for, holds what may be the most strategically valuable resource in the inner solar system: water ice. Billions of tons of it preserved for billions of years in craters where sunlight never reaches. Water that can become rocket fuel that turns the moon into a refueling hub for every deep space mission that follows, Mars, the asteroid belt, everything beyond. Whoever establishes a permanent operational presence at the lunar South Pole first does not just win a symbolic race. They influence the terms under which every nation, every company, and every human being participates in the expansion of civilization beyond Earth. That is not a geopolitical talking point. That is the honest assessment of what is being competed for right now in hangars in Texas and Kent and Cape Canaveral by engineers who mostly don't give speeches about it. They just come back to work every morning and try to solve the next problem. Which brings us back to the two companies and the 18 months ahead. SpaceX has to prove that Starship can refuel in orbit. Blue Origin has to prove that New Glenn can serve as the reliable backbone of a lunar architecture. Both have to demonstrate that their landers can operate in the cislunar environment before a crew is ever assigned to depend on them. Both have to show, in hardware and not in renderings, that private spaceflight has genuinely reached the level of technical maturity that landing humans on another world requires. It may be the most consequential engineering test of this generation. And unlike most things that carry that description, it is actually going to happen. The rockets are built, the test dates exist, the crews who may one day ride these vehicles to the moon are in training right now. 47 years of silence on the lunar surface, 47 years of footprints sitting perfectly undisturbed in a place with no wind and no rain and nothing to erase them. The question being answered in 2026 and 2027 is not whether we go back. That question was settled. The question is who takes us and whether everything they've built is actually ready for what they're about to attempt. The moon is patient. It has been waiting half a century. It will wait a little longer, but the window, the geopolitical, technical, generational window for getting there first on terms we set in hardware we trust with a strategy that doesn't collapse under the weight of its own ambition, that window is open right now, and it does not stay open forever. So, do you think SpaceX or Blue Origin walks away with the crewed lander contract? And does it matter which one wins or only that one of them succeeds? Tell me what you actually think in the comments. I read everyone, and if this is the kind of content worth your time, subscribe. We cover space the way it deserves to be covered, without the hype and without the oversimplification. The footprints on the moon are still there. Soon, there will be new ones.